Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Monica. How are you?
Good afternoon, John. How are you?
Good. Welcome, everyone. I'm John Breault, Vice President of MLS for the Rhode Island Association of Realtors and statewide MLS. And joining me, Monica Staaf, General Counsel for the Rhode Island Association of Realtors and statewide MLS. Good afternoon, Monica. Once again,
Hey,
nice
John.
to
Hi,
see
everybody.
you. And here we are. So we have let me just look. How many weeks has it been since the new rules went into place?
Like
What?
3 weeks, almost,
Yeah, so
almost
three
a
weeks.
month, almost a
Wow.
month by the end of this week.
Yeah, so we've been living sort of in the new world for about a month, and we thought, of course, it was a great idea. We want to be available for you folks to answer questions and talk through things now that you've had an opportunity to sort of see how things are working out. The attendance isn't huge here, not our normal high numbers, which hopefully maybe means that people are, most of the questions have been answered for folks and they've sort of are comfortable or found their rhythm in dealing with transactions now. And so, or maybe I'm just naive. I don't know. What do you think,
Maybe,
Monica?
maybe they're just sick of us.
It could be that we just aren't the draw
That
that
could
we used to
be.
be. I have to say it's a little bit of a bruise to my ego, but it's fine.
Well, we appreciate the
Uh,
people who are here with us today, and that's this way we'll be able to have a chance to answer everybody's question instead of having a backlog. So,
Right. And so, as usual, we won't be unmuting anyone. So don't raise your hands. Just drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them as we can. And hopefully, we'll get through everything. This course. The presentation is set for 90 minutes. We'll see. I mean, we're not going to stick around for 90 minutes if it seems like the questions have, diminished. And so we'll see how we'll play that by ear. Right.
yes. So, John, I've got a
Excellent.
question for you because I've been getting
Well,
a
you
lot
do.
of I think both John and I have been getting a lot of legal questions, so and MLS policy questions. So a couple, and we'll just start until you think of some questions of your own you'd like to ask. But one of them is lately I've been getting a little flurry of calls from commercial brokers and then also from rental agents saying, how do all these compensation changes affect them? So
Okay.
John, you want to answer that one?
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that. So we really are looking at when we look at property types, right? Commercial, land, single family, multifamily, etc. Uh, we're looking at them through two different lenses, right? On the listing side, as it relates to compensation, and then on the buy side, as it relates to working with buyers. So, regarding compensation, on the listing side, uh, compensation is not permitted on any listing at all through the MLS, regardless of property type. So if you're listing a commercial listing in the MLS or a rental listing or land or anything, yeah, you cannot include any cooperative compensation anywhere in the listing and any of the remarks. You cannot attach a document that speaks to compensation. You can't have a URL that links to your company's compensation policy. So that's across the board. Doesn't matter what type of property you are listing. MLS is out of the compensation business. Um, but where we do get questions a lot or some confusion is on the buy side, the buyer side. And specifically, when do I have to have a buyer sign an agreement? I had a buyer in town and they were looking at, they wanted to buy a vacant piece of land and they were only in for one day and I was taking them around and I didn't want to have sit down with them to have them sign this 3-page agreement. Da, da, da. Well, for land listings, you don't. The buyer agreement, the mandatory buyer agreement under the settlement and now under the rules and regs applies only to residential properties. So that's 1, 2, 3, or 4 family properties. If you're taking a buyer to tour a 1, 2, 3, or 4 family property, you must enter into an agreement with them. If you're taking them to a rental, or a commercial property or a piece of land, you do not have to enter into agreement. Now, you could, I suppose, if you want, right, Monica? Consistency, so it doesn't matter. So if you decide if you're going to work with the buyer, you want an agreement across the board, you can. You're just not required to under the new rules.
And product placement, there is a Rhode Island Association of Realtors tenant representation agreement. So if you want to
Why
try
might I
something
use
new,
that?
it's there.
What,
They can
and
use
what,
that
what
if they want to.
for what? What am I doing with that agreement? I have a question for you,
For
Monica. What do I do with that agreement?
I'll give the polite answer. No, the exclusive tenant representation agreement. Don't spit up your drink. Anyway,
Sorry.
the tenant, we're getting punchy now. Oh, we already have a question from people, so we're
Good.
stalling long enough.
Yep.
No, the tenant representation agreement would be if you're working with a tenant, particularly one who wants to see a whole bunch of properties and take a lot of your time, and you can have that tenant sign a compensation agreement to pay you as a rental agent. Or you can negotiate something with the landlord, which is probably the more common scenario, but that does exist. So,
And so now let's talk about, so I'm going to segue into this first question because, um, we've had some questions, because we have like three different versions of the buyer, quote unquote, buyer agreement, right?
Mhm.
And when should I use this version versus that version? And so our question is, what's really the main difference between the buyer representation agreement and the showing and compensation agreement? Monica, do you want to speak to that?
sure. I mean, part of it with the with those two agreements is with the buyer representation agreement, that's when the buyer is a client of yours. So you're actually giving active advice to the buyer. You might be negotiating on behalf of the buyer. You're keeping the buyer's confidences from the seller. So it'd be this, you would use that if you're checking the box on the mandatory real estate relationship disclosure, saying that you're a designated client representative. That would be the time to use that form. The showing and compensation agreements would be if you're a transaction facilitator. I've talked to some brokers and everyone's figuring these things out differently as we go along, but I've talked to some brokers who have said, I think when I first meet a buyer and I'm not sure like if we're going to be compatible with each other, but I also want to get compensated because I'm taking them out to see property. Maybe I'll just start as a transaction facilitator and we'll agree for me to show them certain properties over a weekend, over a few days, agree to compensation for that, see how it's going, and then we can upgrade to a buyer representation agreement.
And we have two versions of that agreement. We have an exclusive and a non-exclusive, right? So if you're acting in that sort of facilitation relationship, you can do it exclusively or not exclusively. And
Right. And like you said, Jen, if someone's a facilitator, that means you're treating the buyer as a customer. So you're not doing any of the things I just mentioned as a buyer rep. You don't owe any loyalty to the buyer. All you do is the only thing you'd owe them would be so-called ministerial tasks, which is like you're kind of putting together paperwork, you're taking them to showings, things like that, but your loyalties are not to the buyer.
And so, now some of the feedback we've received is even those agreements are kind of long, right? And that, there's a lot on it, and that, buyers, there may be challenges in getting buyers to sign those things. Now, I guess partially that's because we took the position of creating sort of checking a lot of boxes and creating that document, right? But because one approach might have been that the settlement really only requires two things: a disclosure that all compensation is negotiable, and some language that spells out exactly what you're going to get paid for the services you're providing for that buyer, right? So in essence, a sort of settlement compliant form might be a couple of paragraphs, right? And so you've heard about those things in some organizations. Maybe they're calling them touring agreements or whatever. And brokerages aren't prohibited from developing their own form that just checks those two boxes. We just decided to sort of take an approach where we wanted to make sure we covered other things as an association, I guess, and have sort of a more robust agreement. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and I do have some breaking news that
You
piggybacks on.
do?
Yes.
Oh,
And I will thank, if anyone today is listening to us from Block Island, John and I gave a presentation to a number of brokers and salespeople from Block Island last week. And that was one of the things they said is, we really want to have that touring agreement. We want to have something that's shorter. I discussed it with the chair of the Forbes committee, and he'd actually had the same idea himself and said, yeah, why don't we take a look, now that we've given us a little bit of time to work, why don't we take a look at doing something shorter? So I've started two things. One is a template that just lists everything, what John just said from the settlement agreement. And it also lists what state law requires when you have a written buyer contract or even a written listing agreement. There's certain minimum things that need to be in there. So I've got that list already. And then now I'm actually working on a draft of the shorter version. So the
Excellent.
Forms Committee will take a look at that next week. So thank you, Block Island folks and others who have suggested that.
So excellent. That's good. So that'll be a nice resource if we can get some information out there to help, maybe with
Yes.
the challenges in getting the buyer to sign these things. So we have a comment. I guess the clients are not ready to sign a compensation agreement with a particular agent in order to tour a rental property.
Mhm.
Again, technically, they don't have to, right? If they're touring a
Right.
rental property, if it's not a residential 1, 2, 3, or 4 family, they're not required to sign an agreement. So you don't need to have them do that. And
Great.
related, it looks like,
Wait, before you move on
oh,
though.
come on. Yeah, go
Come
ahead.
on, come on. We got plenty of time to answer people's questions. Now,
Yeah, that's
before we
true.
move on, so you can do so the tenant representation agreement, that's there if you want to use it, but like John said, it's not mandatory at all. You certainly see tenant representation agreements in commercial transactions. I know that's a whole different kettle of fish. Again, not required, but they're there. The forms are there because usually most of the forms we create because the forms committee thinks of them. Members of the association say, hey, why don't we have a form that does such and such? And the committee evaluates those, but all the members of the committees are volunteers and they're all realtors. So, okay, I'm done with my commercial. Go right ahead, John.
So related, with regards to tenant representation, I feel like they are even less likely to be able to pay out of pocket, and landlords are much less likely to offer any compensation now unless you represent the landlord. So won't tenants be even more likely to be unrepresented now? I mean, uh, yeah, I mean, and that's a challenge even with, I mean, I think with a lot of buyers too, right? A lot of buyers are sort of in that same situation. I mean, obviously tenants, like you say here, even more so, but there are a lot of buyers that are struggling to get the money just to put together to put down in a home. And so they're likely to be in these same situations, and on the sales side, I mean, I guess we'll talk about that in terms of sort of the negotiating and how that can work out through the negotiation process and asking the seller for concessions and all of that. So I guess, there's uh, an opportunity there for buyers that I guess, as you say here, really aren't there for tenants. So it's a problem. I acknowledge that comment. It's well received.
Yeah, although what's interesting though is in Massachusetts, at least in greater Boston, it's been the exact opposite issue. Where there, the common practice has been to have tenants pay
Right.
all brokerage fees. So I'm not
Yeah, on the
suggesting we
listing
do that
side.
here, but yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah,
we,
that's true. Right. So it's a different sort of animal. I mean, I guess like one of the glass half full scenarios from an MLS perspective, one of the challenges in getting, maybe more commercial listings in the MLS or even more rentals was the mandatory offer of cooperative compensation. And now that that's no longer uh, possible, I mean, I suppose from an MLS perspective, one hopes that maybe we can get more rental listings to the MLS and increase your exposure to those in the MLS versus having to sort of hunt around various sites to find those. So,
and John, here's your chance to make another plug for MLS. So if someone did want to list a rental agreement, a rental listing, whether it's commercial or residential in MLS, so where is that populated? People can see it on riliving.com. But
yeah,
where
so
else do those listings
right, and
go?
we do feed to some other websites as well. We feed to Crexy now, and even we have a feed to Commerce RI regarding commercial listings. Now, Commerce RI has some pretty strict sort of guidelines they use, so you can opt in to feed your listing to Commerce RI, but they're sort of selective, I guess, in what they choose to put on there. So there's no guarantee they'll display it. Rentals, go to apartments.com, a few other sites as well. So, and obviously you can set your clients up in Matrix to receive, if they're looking for rentals, you could add them in there. And obviously more rentals means more matches for their criteria.
Yes.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Monica, why don't you read this next one because
Oh,
it's
you're going to give
long.
me the long one to read.
Of
Okay.
course I am.
Good afternoon. I appreciate your time continuing to keep us educated on the changes. I have two questions. The first is, in Rhode Island, what is the law regarding a buyer representation contract with a buyer who goes under contract and then states at the end of the transaction that they do not have the money to pay your service? In Rhode Island, are we allowed to stop the sale, or do we need to take legal action after the fact? I guess I'm answering that one.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to stop the sale itself. If it were commercial, and I realize the changes we're talking about overall are for residential, but there is a commercial broker lien to prevent that from happening to begin with. There's not a residential broker lien. So my answer is going to be that for the most part, you're going to have to do it after the fact.
Do we have in Rhode Island things like contractor liens too? And I guess that wouldn't be applicable because they're not technically contractors, or independent contractor lien. Is there such a thing? Can you do that?
There's a commercial broker lien. So for commercial transactions, but there is
Yeah.
one for residential. There was
I
a
wonder
number of.
why. That's interesting. Why would that be, you think?
Well, I think the idea legislators don't like the idea of. Well, actually, no, but I was about to answer that, but I mean, that was the pushback that I know. I think Connecticut was the first state that had both commercial broker and residential broker liens. And it took them, there was a long gap of, any of you who are licensed in Connecticut may know, but there was a gap of like at least 10 years, if not more, between going for the commercial piece first and then going back and saying, see, this has worked okay, let's go for residential. I think the concern is like if you're tying up commercial property with a lien rather than, I'm not justifying this, I'm just saying I think that was the argument that we heard, that you're tying up someone's home versus a commercial property where everyone assumes they're deep pockets. Maybe they don't, but anyway, no good reason. But I think the legislators had kind of an ick factor about tying up things in a residential property. But
That's interesting. So, okay, there's a comment here regarding touring agreements, and there is a particular organization that has one. And the question is, can we use any variation of that form? I mean, I don't know. They published it, so I don't know if you're allowed to use it or or not. I don't know if they made it open. I think there was another organization, maybe it was EXP or somebody that produced one. I think that they were sort of publishing as like, hey, use our form. So I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if they're given sort of a license to all to do it or not. So apologies for not having that answer. My second question is, I have a buyer who is exclusive to me as a buyer, and we have a contract in Rhode Island. I get a call and they went to an open house in Connecticut and want to submit an offer on a property. Can you confirm that an agreement needs to be executed regarding representation prior to writing an offer? This has caught me off guard in the last week. Buyer never mentioned Connecticut. I'm licensed in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. So they went to an open house on their own, right? Now, so because the timeline is you have to enter an agreement prior to the buyer touring a home, right? Now, going to an open house, is that touring a home or is not? I mean, the other, that's a good question. I don't think it is considered touring a home, but perhaps. So then the question goes on to say, they want to submit an offer. So then you need to execute one prior to writing the offer. I would say the answer is yes, there, because now you're, well, that's a good question, because prior to touring a home, they've already toured the home. Now you're going to write it. I mean, I guess the real answer is why wouldn't you, right? Why wouldn't you want to have one as early as possible to sort of protect yourself in those situations? I mean, the requirement really is tied into prior to touring a home. So if you're working with a buyer prior to touring a home, you're in this case presenting an offer, you're working with a buyer You're not taking them to tour a home, but the tour has happened on
Right.
their own. Under the settlement, maybe we're in a gray area a little bit here, but to me, it would be smart to get one because the big question is, how are you going to get paid, right? Where's the agreement to get paid? If is the buyer going to be paying you? If they're going to be paying, then you need to have an agreement at least to spell out that you're under the settlement that you're providing service to them and what that fee would be, even if you try to then negotiate those like in the offer. So Monica, go ahead. I'm talking, but go ahead. What do you think?
No, you're fine. No, I mean, though, first of all, I want to give the person who posted this question gold stars for being licensed in Connecticut before she writes up an offer there, because I get a lot of calls about that, about people wanting to do business in states where they're not licensed. So congratulations to you for doing that. Yeah, the big thing is what I don't know is if my first reaction is to say you could just amend the Rhode Island exclusive buyer representation agreement to include Connecticut, but I don't know if Connecticut has specific, I'm not licensed to practice law there. So I don't know if Connecticut has specific wording that has to be included in a buyer representation agreement. So you'd want
Are
to double.
you? Oh, so you're reading that? I read it. Maybe I read it incorrectly. I read it to say that they didn't have an agreement at all. But what did I misread that? They're saying they had an agreement in Rhode Island, but not for Connecticut. Is that what that meant? Maybe let's
That's
reread.
yeah, that's how I'd read it. Maybe
I have a buyer who is exclusive to me as a buyer. Oh, and we have a contract. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll forget everything I just said. Interesting. Yeah. So is our buyer agreement strictly for properties in Rhode Island, or does it create that relation? I mean, that's a
well, if she's licensed and her broker are both licensed in Connecticut too. I mean, it could be expanded to write that. I just want to make sure that there isn't, though, any specific language in Connecticut law that has to be included that may not be included in a contract. Because it
I
just seems
got you.
silly to have like two different contracts or three if they expand to
Yeah. So
Massachusetts.
I see. So yeah, right. So
Yeah,
amending that agreement just to sort of, for avoidance of doubt that this covers properties in Connecticut, and I guess add in
right.
whatever you might need to add in for Connecticut license law.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
exactly.
Apologies on that. So forget everything I said and listen to Monica. That's why she's the lawyer and I'm not. So piggybacking on the question of if you can stop a sale, I am licensed in multiple states, and the new normal is listing the compensation on the P&S with a
Good.
statement that commission must be a line item on the closing statement and not to be altered or removed on the document for purposes of closing. Your thoughts? So, we did modify the purchases and sale and agreement to add that language in there, didn't we? So I guess let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk through from the buy side,
Mhm.
how we handle this now. So a buyer wants a property, you have your agreement with them, and you have the ability to write into the letter of intent the whatever condition. And maybe we should look at that. What's the language in the letter of intent? Should I pull that up?
Well, I
What
think
do you think?
it'd be section 18 of the purchase and sales agreement. But I think here's where I'm coming from. I mean, the person who posted this, you're absolutely right. That is, if it's in the purchase and sales agreement, it is something that is part of the transaction and not just up to someone's whim. However, I do know that's always been the case for compensation from a seller to a listing broker. And there are times where a seller does not have the money at the time of closing. And maybe it's something, it's not an official short sale where the lender is signing off on it, but it's pretty close in terms of it. Or maybe it's a builder or someone like that, and they don't have enough money that they're netting out of the proceeds to actually pay compensation. Well, with that, they don't necessarily stop the closing, but the seller, would still have to pay over time. Like they'd have to enter into a separate agreement, like or promissory note or something like that. So that's where I'm thinking of, practically speaking, on the buy side, that um, I don't know that they could unilaterally stop the transaction, but I think this would be a great one to ask closing attorneys, and hopefully you won't get into that. Hopefully that situation won't arise. But I don't know whether closing attorneys will be all handling it the same way or whether there'll be some variations. So I'm going to punt that to the closing attorney, because all I can tell you is I know that there are times where sellers don't have enough money and they've still closed. So whether it was the broker was willing to compromise or whether the attorney said, nope, the closing has to take place no matter what, go sell your jewelry or something to bring enough money to the closing to pay the listing broker.
So I'm
So
going to share the P&S agreement because we have a comment here. Please review the mass P&S. It's much clearer how they have modified this section. You have to specify the amount being paid by the seller and by the buyer.
Mhm.
So let's take a look. Let me just find my zoom in button. So where does this fit in here, Monica? What section are we going
Section
to?
18.
Okay, so right here, let me just zoom in a little bit more, right? This is
Mhm.
how we've handled this. Do you want to talk us through this a little bit?
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't had a chance to use this yet, basically you're presuming that the compensation is going to be paid by the seller to the cooperating broker directly, rather than from a listing broker to a cooperating broker. So you're going to put in the compensation, whether it's a specific dollar amount, whether it's percentage of the gross sales price, which is the second checkbox here. So one of those options, or maybe a third option altogether if you're trying to do a combination or some other approach to that. Some people have asked why this is based on the gross sales price. And I know we've talked a little bit about that before, but the forms committee, and I agree with them, that it'd be simpler to have it based on the gross because people define net sales differently. So if you want to be paid, if you're just looking for compensation on the net, you'd want to spell that out, like what exactly, it might be easier, frankly, to do the dollar amount, but you want to spell that out about what is the net, what is deducted from the gross to get to net. Is it a repair that the seller's doing? What might that be? That we just thought for a starting point, it would make things a little bit more complicated than they need to be at this point. But anyway, that's what the other box is for. You can spell things out further.
And
And
so, oh,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
John.
Yep. No, no,
Go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. I wasn't sure you were going to continue. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to read on. So A here covers what the seller's paying.
Mhm.
B covers what the buyer is paying, if they're paying anything, right? Doesn't say what it is, but it says whether or not the buyer will or will not compensate. Is that correct?
Yes, and part of that's for the lender's benefit and for the benefit of the closing attorney, because as we're adapting to this, they're adapting to this. So that way it kind of prompts them where in fact, I just had a call from someone this morning who said that she's used to sending one compensation bill to the closing attorney and to the lender to pay at the time of closing, and that her brokerage would get the total amount and then pay out a cooperating broker. And she said, yeah, I realize we're not doing that anymore. So, so you want to make sure that this prompts the closing attorney to say, yeah, is there a separate contract I need to take a look at? Is there a
Okay.
separate compensation we need to consider? So
And
that's
so
what.
talking through this then, I'm a buyer rep. I have a contract with the buyer, but I'm asking the seller to pay, you know, by way of concessions or whatever, right? So I'm going to put that in here in section A, and I intend not to collect anything from the buyer in that case. So then I will check the buyer will not compensate, right?
Mhm.
Now, if for some reason there's a situation where I guess you're looking to collect some from the seller and the buyer will also pay, then you've got this
Mhm.
box C, right, where you're sort of saying, hey, I'm
Yes.
getting paid by either both or I'm not, you know, I will or I will not receive compensation for more than one transaction. So there's this disclosure here to disclose that, correct? And that's in requirement under the Code of Ethics. Is that correct?
You are right on a roll today, John. Yes, that is correct.
Well, you know what? We do 1,000 of these things together, Monica, and I guess I learned something after one or two of them. And then you have this last thing, which is what some legal language, just to sort of explain this to us a little bit. What's in this D about?
Yeah, that's sort of legal mumbo jumbo, but it really gets to the point that actually someone had just asked we had a couple of questions earlier about can we stop at closing? What is our remedy? The intent is to kind of strengthen this to say like, this isn't just the buyer and seller, that this is also benefiting someone else who's relying on this contract. So it's supposed to kind of scare I guess no, this is going out publicly, so I'm not gonna say that. Anyway, let's just say it's legal
Okay.
language that's intended to benefit you and make it
Yeah.
clear to the parties, make the
Well, that
parties.
you're somehow, yeah.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay.
okay.
Is there a problem? Is there any problem with having a buyer rep agreement for X%? And thank you for writing X and
Yes, thank you.
writing in the purchase contract, which we just looked at. Well, I mean, I guess we're really talking about maybe the letter of intent, which would probably come. I mean, unless you fill out the P&S and you send that as your offer, is that anyway?
I'd say
Uh,
that's more common than not, and in the
is
southern
it
part of the state, I don't know if anyone ever uses a letter of intent. The closer you get to the mass border, then you're more likely to have the two-step
okay?
process,
Perfect.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, because in Mass they do the offer. Okay, so let me get back to this. So, is there any problem with having a buyer rep agreement for X% and writing the purchase contract asking seller to pay the X, but then the buyer agent credits a portion of that back to the buyer?
Yep, you can do a rebate. But like anything else, make sure if that's something that you're planning to do, discuss those options with the buyer's permission, but discuss those options if there's a lender involved. Discuss that with them upfront or as early as possible in the transaction to make sure that there's a way that they can make that work. But it's certainly legal to have a rebate to the buyer.
If a buyer is reticent to sign the exclusive buyer rep agreement because they fear being on the hook for the entire amount in Section 9A, can you state specifically what will come from the buyer and what you hope to get from a seller, i.e., a total of X%, Y from the buyer, Z from the seller?
Hmm. Thinking about how that would work. Because you're still, yeah, because you still need to have the buyer commit to a certain
I mean,
amount, percentage or
I mean,
rate.
couldn't you just simply sort of put in your agreement that the buyer is just paying Y, and then, but in your letter, your offer, or whatever, in your purchase agreement, you're asking for the seller to pay. Well, no, because the restriction is that you can't get paid any more than what's in the agreement, right?
Mhm.
That's one of the restrictions. So you're saying I'm going to get paid this amount, the buyer, and so I guess the question then becomes, you'd have to add language. Well, what if they don't? Like, what if the seller says no, right? What happens? Your buyer will only pay you Y, I guess, right?
Yeah, because the one concern, much as I'd love to say yes, but the concern I have is that, one thing that's clear from the settlement agreement is it can't be compensations, kind of whatever the listing or whatever the seller is offering. And
Yeah.
even though this is more detailed than that, but it seems like you're kind of getting in that direction. Like rather than
Uh,
setting, this is what my services are worth.
right.
And then you can explain to the buyer as part of your pitch, like, look, this is what we would ask for from the seller, that kind of thing. But okay, do you want to read it? I'll read a couple.
Yeah.
Just
Please go ahead. I'm
you can save
sorry.
your voice. So,
Yeah. Thank you.
okay. This is something we are adding to additional provisions so that the buyer can't close without paying the agent. Interesting. Yeah, if there's any specific language you want to share, feel free to share that with the group about or with us about what exact language you're saying. I mean, if you're saying this transaction cannot close unless this is paid or something, I'm not sure what you have in
Mm.
mind, but certainly interesting. So, okay, so we got that one. So, if the seller is willing to pay the cooperating broker, is there a place on the listing agreement where that percentage would be agreed upon?
All right. Let me pull up the listing agreement. So, yeah, we've been focusing a lot on the buy side. So I think it's a good opportunity now to sort of talk about, the things brokers need to think about on the listing side and how they handle that in their agreement. So let me share that exclusive right to sell, right? Because I guess, like one of the first questions as a listing broker you're sort of asking you know, how are you, I mean, how you intending to handle compensation, right? there are some brokerages that are trying to sort of preserve the old way, right? Where they collect an entire amount and then receive the authorization to share that out, right? And then there are others that have said, well, we're just gonna put our amount in as the listing side,
Mhm.
and we'll let the buy side ask for their amount through negotiations, and we'll handle it that way. So that the seller isn't, so that one, you're not collecting the whole thing as a listing broker and figuring out that now I have to pay the cooperating broker, which the DOJ has sort of chimed in already on, saying they don't particularly care for the sharing of commissions. Um, by putting it in the transaction, it sort of becomes part of the negotiation and gets put into the closing document, and it's now paid from the seller to either the buyer or the cooperating broker directly, right? So those are sort of the questions we're getting, right, Monica? How do I write this in? So to this again, if the seller is willing to pay the buyer agent, is there a place on the listing agreement where that percentage? The other question is that's come up or that we've talked about. And see, I'm learning a lot from you. What section? First of all, I'm scrolling like
I would
crazy.
start with section 6.
I mean, the other thing is, if you leave it to the negotiation, you're not sort of predetermining what amount the buy side is going to get, right? You're just, the seller, you may have the discussion with the seller. There's a willingness to pay without them committing to a set amount. Although I guess you could, in essence, if that's your wish. So go ahead, Monica. I'm speaking too much.
Yeah.
You're the lawyer.
No, you're fine. So in section 6, so that's in the past, I'd say, I mean, like as John said, some people may still choose to do it this way. In the past, the listing broker would put in total compensation, and then part of that they would pay to or offer to a cooperating broker if there was one. So now I think what seems to be more the trend, and I think someone indicated that too in the Q&A, was you're seeing more that the listing broker is putting in there after negotiating with the seller. This is what I want the seller to pay me. It's the default is gross. You can certainly change that to net if you want to treat that differently, but this is what I want to this is what I want to be paid in section 6. And then John, if you go down, could you scroll down to section 7? Yeah, there you go. So that's it. Basically, it's additional provisions having to do with compensation. So if you want some other arrangement, whether you want to be paid on the net, whether you're going to be paid, an incentive like a bonus or something like that as a listing broker, that can all go there. If you wanted to pay a cooperating broker, like you personally have the seller pay you the total amount and have you pay a cooperating broker, that's something you could put there. We took it out because we took out the previous language just because of what John said earlier, that MLS is out of the compensation business. And the main target of the lawsuits and also with the Department of Justice, their concerns have been broker to broker compensation more so than compensation from a seller to a cooperating broker. So, but if you want to do that, that's exactly where you'd put the language.
Yeah, I mean, so right. And then I guess by doing it that, then upon inquiries from cooperating brokers, they're going to ask, hey, are you offering compensation? I guess you could say my seller is willing to pay up to blank percent, right? Or yes, we're offering blank percent or whatever. Then, again, one of the other things is then you have, so previously when MLS, when there was the offer of compensation through MLS sort of acted as that contract, that broker to broker contract for the payment of compensation.
Mhm.
Now that no longer exists. So I guess if you go this route, yes, we're going to pay blank percent or whatever, the cooperating broker is probably going to say, well, let's get that in writing, right? We have no document to,
Right.
do we do emails or I mean, if I was a cooperating broker, I'd want to make sure I get that in writing, right? So, and then I guess there are some cooperating brokers that don't even want to collect from the broker. They really would rather just sort of deal with this. Let's get it from the seller. Let's get it into the settlement statement, and let me get my check at closing, right?
Well, I think it's much cleaner, and I think that someone who, I forgot who it was, but someone who'd posted earlier who's licensed in multiple states was saying that that's really the direction that she was seeing things going. But the person, this most recent question though was about the seller, and if you put that language there too.
Yep.
So like really what John was talking, you were walking through scenarios. Is it in the seller's best? And you're going to come out with different answers depending on your brokerage, what you're comfortable with, and what your client's comfortable with. So some sellers might say, hell yes, let's get in. I want to offer the same amount of compensation to any cooperating broker who brings me a ready, willing, and able buyer. I'll commit to a certain dollar amount, percentage, whatever, upfront, no matter what. Other sellers may be saying, you know what, I'm willing to compensate, but let's just see what what the whole purchase and sales agreement looks like. What's the purchase price? Is this a competitive situation with multiple offers? Is this, I've got like one live buyer and I want to keep them? How much am I netting? And that's something some closing attorneys are really focused on, as of some of our members, which is the seller's net sheet. What is the seller netting out of all of this? Well, if they're getting over asking price, they might be, more willing to agree to pay a compensation to a cooperating broker than they might if they were getting far below asking price, for example. So those are all
Yeah.
considerations.
It seems like it's a lot easier a conversation sort of to have with your seller with that regard. Like instead of saying, hey, look, just, pay me all this. And then if somebody comes, I'm going to, share this out. Or are you willing to pay blank? Or, as you say, I mean, I guess it's very market sensitive, right? And when, in a seller's
Yes.
market, they may have more flexibility with that where, yeah, let's have all the offers come in. Let's put in what they're asking. Let's evaluate it. Let's see where I, as the seller, land at the end of all of this. In a buyer's market, we've seen things like seller will pay closing costs or whatever. And so maybe that's a little different where they might proactively sort of want to throw that bone out there that the seller is more willing to pay something as an incentive. Let's read this longer question because that kind of relates exactly to what we're talking about and sort of the pros and cons with the
Oh, wait,
broker
there's
collecting it.
another one. There's a shorter one before that. We should
Oh,
probably.
all right, go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead.
we don't want people to think we're censoring. I'll read it. We don't
I'm
want
not
people.
censoring. I was just trying to keeping it topical, but go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead,
No, it's just a
Monica.
quick one. It's just a quick one. No, I just want to make sure I don't want people to feel like we're just selectively reading questions. So the person writes, thank you for the explanation. I understand the contract. Was just really shocked by how much more complicated this is on the Rhode Island forms. So if you have any specifics about that, I'm absolutely willing to share those with the forms committee. And just to let everybody know, so the forms committee did spend a lot of time in the forms. That was based on what we knew at the time when the forms committee was focusing on them. And the intent is always like, let's give these forms some time. Let's see how things are working in the field. And then, do we need to make any tweaks? Are there other forms that people need, et
Right.
cetera? So they're not going to
Yeah.
rush and change something like in 2 weeks from now, but I'd say like towards the end of this year, the committee will, we're gathering everyone's feedback. And if you see something you like elsewhere and think, hey, why don't we do that here? Or something we do that you don't like, just let me know. I'm happy to pass it on to the forms committee.
Yeah. We've always made tweaks to forms based on, the marketplace and the needs of our customers. So that will continue. Okay. Am I okay to read this next question now, Monica?
Oh, I guess so.
Do you think we will get to the point that we as brokers do not hold escrow? There are times where we have large deposits and then we are paying the buyer's broker after closing. I don't think the listing brokerage should be paying for the buyer's broker out of their commission account because the seller or the buyer is responsible to pay the buyer broker, not the cooperating broker. The compensation agreement is no longer from broker to broker, so best to have attorney or title company hold escrow. They're sort of asking. So that sort of goes with what we were talking about, I suppose, which is one of the pros of not, if the listing broker just collecting their fee, let the cooperating broker ask in their office, offer, and then negotiating that and putting it in the settlement statement.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that you're going to see a lot more closing attorneys wanting you to transfer that additional fund from your escrow account. If you're still holding escrow funds, transfer that to them so they can pay out the cooperating broker at the closing. The other thing is, will we get away from brokers holding escrow funds? There's one instructor, and I will mention him since he's one of our instructors. Kevin Dumont has been someone who's really done a lot of buyer representation for many years, gotten buyers to sign contracts before they were cool or required. And Kevin, that's one of the things he's done is he said, I want to get out of the escrow business. So he never takes escrow funds. And Kevin, I hope if you're listening, I hope I'm quoting you correctly, but I've heard him say that a number of times. He just always builds it into the contract that an attorney is the one holding the funds. And just so that way, if there are deposit disputes, if there are issues, kind of not his problem. He's out of the mix. So that's something you could do. I mean, if you have an attorney who's willing to hold the escrow funds or someone wants to pay them to do that, nothing stops you from doing that now. In the purchase and sales agreement that John pulled up, the forms committee changed a few years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. They now have a section where it was always the listing broker who held the funds. Now there's a fill in the blank. So they can agree, the buyer and seller can agree to have someone else hold funds. So that was probably a 2-part answer to your question, but yeah.
And so here's someone's comment just sort of related to the cooperating broker picking up the phone and asking the listing broker if compensation is available. This person suggests the answer is simply the seller is willing to consider any request for compensation as part of the transaction. Please write it into the purchase and sales agreement. That's an excellent comment. Thank you. So while we give people time, we've caught up. I think this is a first since we've been doing these on questions. Monica, is there anything else from the legal front? I know there are certain things going on with rental registries or lead paint or whatever. You might want to take this time to sort of speak to some of those.
Mention those, and I also had something we both probably want to chime in on before I do that.
All right. Go ahead.
That is settlement postcards.
Oh yeah.
We've been having people contacting us saying, okay, I got this postcard. What does this mean? Or I have a client who's been following some national news and saying, hey, where can I get in on this settlement agreement? So
I've got mine right here.
Oh yeah, hold it up, John. Let's see.
I don't want you to see my address though, or the URL, but there you go. This one is Burnett versus NAR. Right. And so, I want you to scan my code. Sorry. I don't want anyone getting my 50 cents.
Yeah, so basically if you get, I know a realtor had sent me one the other day that was from the Gibson, settlement of the Gibson lawsuit. So you've seen different things. So one thing is if someone gets a postcard, they're at least theoretically eligible for one of these settlement payouts. So you don't really want to answer questions about that. That's something the National Association of Realtors has even recommended to us as staff people of a realtor association and a multiple listing service, is just there's a QR code. John covered us up because he doesn't want us to take pictures of it, but there's a QR code. There's also a phone number that you'll see in any of these settlement postcards. And that's what the person should do who gets a card. Just they'll call that number, or they'll follow the QR code. They'll be frequently asked questions. They can say, all right, I got this postcard. What does this mean? What paperwork do I have to complete? And then what makes me eligible? What do I need to do next? So you don't need to get into all that. I had a really good question yesterday from someone who said, and I made me realize, like, okay, I bet this person isn't the only one who's confused about this. The person said that some clients had contacted her to say, hey, I've been keep hearing about this settlement agreement. How do we get in on it? Well, her thought was, well, we haven't been sued in Rhode Island, so they're probably not going to get anything. Well, the thing is, and John, actually, you might want to touch that one, is even though we haven't been sued in Rhode Island, why might people in Rhode Island be eligible for the settlement?
Well, it's a nationwide settlement, right? So that doesn't matter where you've been sued. It matters if you've bought a home in the United States, right? Bought or sold a home. So, yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Simple as that, right? Sorry, it's kind of a boring answer. No. Hope I didn't let you down with that. I feel like I did, Monica. Did you want me to say more?
Well, I think you could play some music for us on your bass or something like
that.
That's
okay.
So, well, actually, you know what? I'd really like to ask if people are in the sharing mode. I'd really like to ask for any of you who have had closings already under this new system. Any words of wisdom to others? How has it worked out for you? We can't pretend that this whole thing is just a wonderful thing that will make us all happy and make life easier for everybody, but it's still helpful to kind of hear what what experiences people have been having so far, or even having a buyer, discussing with buyers to sign a buyer representation agreement. I can say one of the, and actually maybe I will hijack this for lead as you suggested, but one of the, I'd say one of the questions there are two questions I've been getting a lot of, and I know probably John and MLS have been getting some different variations on it. One is, let's say that my brokerage we don't feel comfortable with buyer contracts, whether they're representation contracts or transaction facilitator, just not sure if we want to sign them. So who's policing it? What happens if we don't, what happens if we don't use buyer contracts? So John, you want to take, I know you can't give the amount yet, but all right, you want to take part of that, John?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is a requirement. And so we did, actually we're in the process there, because there are no current sanctions in our list of fines and penalties at the moment, but we are adding those in. So the first step was really to get the rules changes in place that were specific to the settlement. And now we just need to add in some sanctions related to that. It's not really our goal to just, collect money, but we have to have an enforcement mechanism because the MLS is charged with enforcing these rules since we're now, protected under the settlement. And so it's sort of to speak to the buyer rep agreement specifically, because, well, really there's sort of two sanctions related to this. One is including any compensation information on the listing side. That's prohibited. So there'll be a potential sanction related to that. And the second is a failure to have the written buyer agreement. And so I just want to say to people on the listing side, this is not really your problem in the end. I mean, I have to put it bluntly, but on the listing side, you can ask a cooperating broker if they have an agreement, but they're under no obligation to present it to you. You have no obligation to see it or to even enforce that. It's really ultimately, as a listing broker, not your concern. You can ask, hey, do you have one? If you suspect they don't, you would really, contact MLS and say, hey, I don't think this broker is abiding by the settlement. I don't think they have an agreement, and we would enforce it internally. It's similar to what we already do on the listing side, right? If somebody suspects that a listing broker, if I'm bringing a buyer to your property, I can ask if you have a contract, but I don't have a right to see it. And if I think you don't have one, I would call the MLS and say, hey, I think they don't have a listing agreement. And then we would, contact the listing broker and we would, enforce that rule. So.
And the other piece of it is you probably want to get paid too. And as more brokerages are moving away from, I mean, like I said, some are still doing it, but you're free to do it. But as you're seeing more brokers kind of moving away from broker to broker compensation, if you don't have a written agreement to pay you, how are you going to get paid? So if you don't have a buyer contract, so look at it this way. Some people who even who have buyer contracts are saying, all right, what if we're in some really tough negotiations with the seller? We've built my compensation into the purchase and sales agreement, but the seller's kind of pushing back. I don't want to be the one kind of standing between the buyer getting the house and not getting the house. And some people really agonize over that. Well, if you don't even have a contract with the buyer, and the buyer, like, why is the buyer sticking up for you? They might like you, but like, if they view it as somehow that you're standing between them and their dream house, or made to look that way, and you don't have anything to back it up, why wouldn't they just say, hey, I'll ditch you. I'll go with it, because I don't have a contract with you. Anyway, but I see we have some questions and comment. Oh, good. Oh, we have a couple of tips here. I'll read this one because I like this. Okay, I bring the purchase and sales agreement with me to showings so the buyer client can see the professional service fee section, explaining that we will request it to be part of the transaction. But if the seller declines, we'll have another conversation and how we'll proceed with an offer. Yeah, I like that a lot because that really gives the buyer some comfort that I know when they see whatever number or percentage rate that you are proposing and discussing with them for it to be paid for your professional services, you're already kind of showing them, okay, here's exactly how we will do this otherwise. So it's very concrete showing that. So thank you very much for graciously sharing that tip. Okay, and then we have another one. Go
Yeah,
ahead, John.
I'll give you a break. I've had no issues with closings. What I have run into, and this speaks to something you referenced earlier, Monica, is what I have run into is when I've represented a buyer and I'm receiving a portion from the buyer as well as the seller, the attorney is confused and they want the two separate commission statements for each side. So they want to see that proof that where's the agreement with the seller? Where's the agreement with the buyer to justify the payments coming from both sides, right?
Yes. Oh, and by the way, I've actually been asked, speaking of attorneys, I'm actually, one of the title companies has asked me to do kind of a podcast that they can share with attorneys. So I think the closing attorneys whom you work with the most, kind of your go-to closing attorneys, I think some of them are very much on the ball, very up to speed, have been following this closely. Other people might know something's going on, but haven't had to deal with it yet. So I'm hoping that will help the title companies, that will help get out the word to some of the attorneys who maybe real estate isn't necessarily their bread and butter. So anyway, enough about that. And this is okay. I can read this one, John. Give you a break so you can sip your whatever's in that cup of yours.
Water.
Okay, nice solo cup. I'm sorry. Actually, mine isn't much better. I've got this. So, all right. Closings have been going smoothly. We find it a bit easier to just focus on the listing commission, let the offers flow in, and then we will just focus on the net numbers for our sellers. 99% of the offers we have received include the seller to either pay buyer broker compensation in its entirety or partially. I have to say it has not been a huge change in our brokerage. My agents are not having issues with buyers signing agreements. Smooth so far. Thank you for the great forums. Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that's been going well for you. Good. It gives some hope from some other people who either haven't had the transactions yet or maybe haven't had quite as smooth sailing yet. So thank you for sharing those encouraging words. Okay.
So I typed an answer. So just a comment related to why they like the Massachusetts form. There's another reason why they, and then another comment saying not to beat a dead horse. So I, of course, picked on them a little bit, but that's good.
Okay.
It's good.
It can't
Yeah,
be great
and they did offer to.
Be great at everything.
Yeah, right. I mean, we would be curious to see it. Not that we necessarily can copy their creative work, I guess, or whatever. But if there's something there that's, I guess that could be a tweak to ours. We're always open to feedback, as you said.
Although I will say, what about that law professor? We did get some kudos.
Yeah. So there was a law professor from Buffalo. I don't recall the exact college, but she had published a review of 15, 20 forms from associations across the country, and to review the post settlement forms and really evaluating them for their quote unquote, I guess, buyer friendliness. And so of the 15 to 20 that were reviewed, she broke it down into sections, into the groups, like contracts that do this bad thing, and then mentioned all these various organizations and contracts that do this, which in any event, while we were one of those that the forms were reviewed, we were not included in any of the bad sections. So by virtue of that, we seem to have passed the test from her perspective in reviewing contracts, that she didn't deem our forms as being anti-consumer. Is that a fair way of saying it, Monica?
It is, and I did something normally I wouldn't do, but I was just in one of those moods. So I contacted her and just kind of said, like, hey, did you have any feedback about ours? And she said that she thought ours was one of the better ones out there because it wasn't trying to basically we were trying to protect our members from violating the settlement agreement. And where other people are doing things like, still trying to keep in the broker to broker compensation and doing all the things that are not the best route. Anyway.
Okay, so if you were doing buyer showings for another agent, either as a courtesy or for compensation. So this is on the buy side. So somebody, another agent, has a buyer and they've asked you to perform some services on their behalf. How can you ensure that the buyer's agent has a signed agreement with the buyer before you perform showings or other services? I assume we don't have a right to see what their percent agreement is, but to remove liability, we should ensure the agreement exists. I agree. You definitely should. And, and in fact, you may still, I mean, the question really is, do you need to execute your own agreement on top of that one for your own? So, because you're helping a licensee has an agreement with a buyer, maybe not. They've
Well,
asked you to
wait, I gotta
perform
stop you there.
services.
I gotta
Yeah,
stop you right there, John. It's the brokerage that has the contract.
true.
It's brokerage
And
that,
we don't know in this case. We don't know in this case if this person works for the same brokerage or a different
exactly.
brokerage, right? So, all right. Well, now we got some time to kill. We've got some scenarios. So let's say you work for the same brokerage, right? If you're within the same brokerage, it's then the broker has an agreement with the buyer. I think you're fair, I suppose by virtue of that, you're protected under that. If there's an agreement in place, the broker would certainly want to make sure there's an agreement, right? Um, I guess
Yeah,
you could
and you should
ask.
be listed. Yeah, and also you should be listed like just like people have done in the listing agreement for a long time, or at least should have been doing for a long time. Is if you're going to have multiple people, maybe it's a team or maybe just someone who you regularly, you work together closely and you take turns covering for each other. Include that person, list that person on the buyer rep agreement or the buyer contract or on the mandatory real estate relationship disclosure, but you want to have some record that this person is still, that you're still acting on behalf of the buyer and that you're assisting this person. And also
Okay.
you want to make sure that the buyer knows that someone else is doing is a substitute. Do you know what I mean? Because if they thought they were working with a certain person, I realize, look, people have vacations, people have weddings to go to, things, other or medical emergencies, things that come up, but you still want to make sure that the buyer understands, like, hey, this person is also on my side, at least if you're in the same, if you're
If
doing.
you're in the same firm. Okay. So now let's say we're in a different firm. So let's say my friend works, maybe they're a small company or they're one person operator. We have we're two independent brokers or two separate companies, and they're going to Bora Bora for the month, and they've asked, hey, I'm going to be out of the country for a month. Would you mind working with my buyer? Now I'm not under that blanket brokers. What do I do? I mean, I certainly would ask. I mean, I do have some exposure. Should I get my own agreement with the buyer under the lawsuit, under the settlement? I mean, how does, or do they, as you say, do they still amend that agreement? So now it's an agreement between two brokerages, so it's not exclusive?
Well, the thing is, unless it really is like a, kind of a sole practitioner kind of thing where it's two principal brokers covering for each other or something. You can't do work for more than one brokerage at the same time if you're a salesperson or an associate broker. So that would be a little, I mean, I
But if
guess
I'm a
it's
broker,
theoretically, yeah.
but if,
Yeah,
right?
like if you had like two maybe sole practitioners or people with really small brokerages, and they said like, I don't have enough people in my own brokerage to cover for me. I want to, have a relationship like a buddy system with someone from another brokerage. Yeah, as long as you're the managing broker or you're the principal broker, then you could do business for more than one brokerage at the same time. But just like you might have remember in MLS, I don't know if you've ever done this, but a joint listing agreement where you've got two different brokerages are listing the property for the same seller. And so it's an exclusive, but it's only those two brokerages. And then they not only need to have a listing agreement with the seller, they need to have an agreement with each other. Like, how are you getting paid? How does this work? So I think you'd have to do the same kind of thing for the buyer. Um, and
And
then, and then finally you have a scenario where I was assuming, I think you and I have been both reading this as you're doing, like you have the same relationship with the buyer, you're covering for another broker and you are also representing the buyer. But I mean, the third scenario would be, you're the listing broker, someone contacts you and says, hey, I've got these buyers under contract. I gotta have a dentist appointment or what, whatever. They really want to get in to see the property. Can I send them over directly to you? you know, that would be the third one, where you're not really doing it for them, but you're doing the person a favor by letting the buyers come over unaccompanied. So yeah, even with that, there are a few ways, I mean, like John said, if you're within the same brokerage, yeah, your brokerage is gonna have the contract, or should have the contract. If you're two different brokerage, broker to broker, you should have already signed something before you even get into that kind of scenario. And then if it's a listing broker, it really depends on how in your face you want to be. I mean, I've talked to some brokers who've said, all right, when I've talked to people who are working with buyers and they really don't seem like they kind of know anything but much or barely know anything about the settlement agreement. They don't want to embarrass them in front of with a client, so they'll kind of separately contact them and say, listen, you do have a contract, right? But if you want to be in your face about it, you can ask the buyers point blank when they come in. Have you signed a contract? I mean, like right now, I think we're trying to help. I think people are trying to help each other out as we adjust to this new system together. But if you're fed up with someone, you can certainly ask the buyers, did you sign a contract?
And so I'm going to skip the order here because this directly
Sure.
relates to this. Are we allowed to put two agent names on the buyer agreement, but only one agent name on the mandatory relationship disclosure?
No, no, they need to match.
Okay. I hold multiple licenses. In order to show a property in Rhode Island, I have to send the listing agent the showing and compensation agreement for the seller to sign it prior to the showing of that property. Apologies, still a bit confused. Actually, that we don't have that agreement anymore, though, right? The showing and compensation agreement, that's gone away.
Yeah, we had a compensation to cooperating brokerage agreement, and that went away.
Am I getting confused? Is the showing and compensation agreement the facilitation version of
Yes,
the? Okay, see, I'm confused too. All
I
right,
know. If we're
all right.
confused,
So
everyone else is gonna
no,
get
no, no, no. Right.
confused.
So I hold multiple licenses. In order to show property in Rhode Island, I have to send the listing agent the showing and compensation agreement for the seller to sign. No, no, no. That's an agreement strictly between you and the buyer. If you're talking about how you get compensated, how do I get paid in that scenario where you have that agreement? You're putting your compensation ask, I guess, in either your letter of intent or the purchase and sales agreement, right? And
Yes,
that's where that goes. And that's where the seller signs.
yep, yep, exactly. And if the seller were offering, if there are sellers who want to offer a set amount of compensation across the board, um, yeah, I suppose that, but I don't know how many sellers will want to sign it in advance, to say like, I'm gonna commit to this amount before they know what the dollar amount is, but um, you could certainly try it.
Well,
But
that's where that suggestion we had earlier about, put your ask in the purchase and sales and in your offer, and my seller will evaluate that along with all the other
yes.
offers.
So I think I might hijack for a minute before,
Yeah, go
unless you
ahead.
have any other questions, and if not, we can and go away early. But I did, since John mentioned about the rental registry and the lead laws, just in case any of you, I know the main focus here with the settlement agreement has been on sales, but if any of you own rental property, or rental agents, property managers, etc., or even are working with a buyer who might be buying a multi-unit property or even a single family home that they might want to rent, condo, cottage, something like that. Anyway, you just want to make sure that the Department of Health has now launched the rental registry. It's a state law, and by October 1st, all rental properties, and if it's something someone can legally live in, so it doesn't include commercial, but if it's a property, if it's a dwelling unit that someone can live in legally, then you'll need to have it registered with the Department of Health by October 1st. And so we just sent a blast email to the Realtor Association, just sent a blast email to all of our members last Friday. So if you haven't seen that, feel free to contact me about that. But and the thing that's you want to be aware of is it's all properties, not just properties built before 1978. It's all rental units that have to register. all rental units don't need lead certificates, but all rental units have to register. So just planting that seed, and I don't want to spend too much time on it just because it doesn't have to do with the topic that we're here about, but might as well take advantage of some breaking news. So, okay.
So this next question we kind of started in this area, but let's circle back, which is which one of the showing agreements must I sign for showing a property? So, people are confused with that because we have three different forms, as we said. We have the buyer representation agreement, which creates an exclusive buyer representation relationship where you're representing the buyer under license law, right? And then we have two facilitation agreements that are called showing and compensation agreements. So that's where you don't want to establish that buyer agency. Well, I know we don't call it agency in Rhode Island. I'm sorry. What do we call it? Buyer relationship, I guess. I should let you answer this question, Monica. Go ahead.
No, you're doing
take
fine.
it.
Keep going.
I'm passing the baton on. Okay. So then we have these two showing and compensation agreements. And the only difference, the difference between those showing and compensation agreements and the buyer representation agreement is your representation status under license law, right? I'm either representing the buyer or I'm a transaction coordinator. I don't represent anybody. Then of those two showing and compensation agreements, am I going to be, is it an exclusive relationship where the buyer can't go to anybody else? Or is it a non-exclusive relationship? So maybe, non-exclusive, I just want to sort of create this one-day agreement or one particular property agreement, I guess, or something like that. I don't know. What give me an example, maybe, Monica, where it would make sense to use the non-exclusive showing.
Yeah. I guess it's like using an open listing. It's, they exist. Is it better than not having a client?
I guess we wanted to give people options, right? I think,
yes.
Especially as we were looking at this, maybe, I think one of the concerns initially was, mandatory buyer agreements. How the heck are we going to get buyers to sign these things, right? And so to soften the blow, it's like, well, maybe we create these things that aren't full-on buyer representation agreements, but, a little lighter. And so this facilitation thing came up, but I don't, in looking at it now, I don't know that some of the feedback we're getting isn't necessarily it's about the relationship as much as maybe just sort of the pure length of the document, right? And so it could very well be that these showing and compensation agreements kind of just don't get used much, and you end up just getting sort of this light thing that we referred to earlier, which just sort of meets the minimum requirements of the settlement and Rhode Island law.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, they'd be signed before touring. One thing, just as a reminder, much as we'd love to have you use our forms, you don't have to. And these forms are provided as benefits for whether it's MLS participants and subscribers. And the RIAR forms are provided for members of the Realtor Association. So if your brokerage, and I know some brokerages have, if you'd rather develop something else that within your brokerage, just make sure that whether you're working with an attorney, whether your brokerage is doing it, just make sure that it meets the requirements of the settlement agreement about what has to be in there. But you can certainly do that. But I do have one more thing. I was about to say, hey, we might end early, but I do have one scenario I'd like to walk everybody through because I do get a lot of questions about it. There was confusion even before the settlement agreement, even before the lawsuits, confusions about this. So here's the scenario. Okay, ready, John? No, everyone ready? Okay, so I'm the listing broker and an unrepresented buyer, John, comes to my open house, or John contacts me and wants to arrange a showing. So he's got no representation. All right. So a couple of questions about that. One is, I'll stick with the open house because that's what a lot of the questions have been about. So John walks into my open house. I ask him if he's, working with anyone exclusively, signed a contract. No. Okay. So if I want to work with John, first of all, do I have to have him sign anything at that moment?
Let's back that up. First question is, they walk into my open house under the settlement. Am I required to have them sign something, the buyer agreement? right? That's the first thing. So right now I'm just wearing the seller's hat. I'm
Yep.
representing the seller. And the
Mhm.
answer is no, I don't have to have them sign anything. And to your earlier point, if they call me to see my listing, it's the same thing. As long as I'm not working on behalf of the buyer, I'm just representing the seller. I don't have to do that. Same thing if I'm a friend, I'm just hosting the open house on behalf of the listing broker. As long as I'm not representing the buyer, same thing. So I don't have to have them sign anything. But if they then want to work with me, that's where it can get a little bit more complicated, right? If they want to submit an offer, that's even the question. It's like, look, they don't really want to enter into a relationship with me per se, but no, okay, I'm ready to submit an offer.
Mhm.
Okay, that's where some people are asking, like, well, geez, I'm still representing the seller, but before I can take the offer, now I'm going to help them write it up. Do I have to have them sign this agreement? And
The
and
National
I
Association, oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I triple checked this with the National Association of Realtors legal team, and they just put out something about it the other day too, but they say no, as long as you're only representing the seller. But this is the part that can get a little, but some people have said, all right, I represent the seller, but can I have that buyer sign a contract anyway? Yeah, you can, that's where where you'd use one of the transaction facilitator agreements. Because, and this is what I want to clarify, because a lot of people think in that scenario, if I did decide to work with John as an unrepresented buyer, to help him put together the offer, one, I need to have him sign a mandatory real estate relationship disclosure. And then at that point, and then two, if regardless of whether I use a contract with him, what's my relationship to him? Well, my relationship to John, if I hadn't signed, if he and I had not signed a buyer representation contract before, all right, I'm only representing the seller, then John's my customer. I'm not a dual facilitator. I have both sides. I'm not a dual facilitator. My loyalties are exclusively to the seller at that point. I'm treating John as a customer. So if John says, how much do you think I should offer? Full price, or I don't know. I can't advise you on that. You know what I mean? Should I have a home
50,000 over
inspection?
asking.
Yeah, like, should I have a home inspection? Well, I have a house to sell. You know, anything like that, things that he tells me. I don't owe him confidentiality. I can tell that to the seller. He's my customer at that point. I'm not a dual facilitator. The only time I would be a dual facilitator would be if I'd already been working with John. We had signed a buyer representation agreement, not the day of the open house, but maybe I'd been showing him properties before. I had this new listing go on the market and where I'm representing the seller. Then when I'm representing the seller as a client rep, John as a client rep, the two of them get together. I could refer John to someone else within my brokerage if he wants representation, if he wants an advocate for him. Or I could, at that point, I could see if the seller and John are willing to have me work with them as a dual facilitator. But I just find that's an area that's always caused confusion. And so you don't just create dual facilitation with someone you've never laid eyes on, because it's very confusing from the consumer's perspective, and also something that a lot of insurance companies that offer errors and omission insurance are concerned about. Because what they're saying is, all right, if John just walks into my open house and I instantly say, oh, guess what? Here, sign a contract with me. I'm going to represent you as, I'm going to be a designated client representative for you. And then 2 seconds later, I'm having him sign a dual facilitator form that says kind of the opposite of that I'm not an advocate for him. I don't have loyalty towards him. I'm having watered down services to both him and the seller. And you've also got to explain to the seller, hey, all right, I'm working with John. He was my client before too. So now I can't give you advice on what makes sense. Does it make sense to counteroffer on something? Is this a good offer? Should I ask for anything? I can't do that anymore if I'm a dual facilitator. So really make sure that you understand that, and feel free to contact me separately if we don't get to it today. But that's very, very important to understand, because true dual facilitation should be, normally it's very rare, and it only happens when you already have had and been an advocate for each party on that.
I think I'd be if I was a seller and my broker all of a sudden told me because of this that they couldn't help me out anymore, I'd be kind of cheesed off. I'm like, hey, what the hell? Now all of a sudden you're abandoning me. What? That'd be a little rough.
Yeah, and I'm paying everybody too, so.
Yeah.
um,
Well,
So
that's
we,
one.
oh, go ahead,
Go
John.
ahead. Well, I guess that's sort of something that came up a little bit. I don't know how much we want to really dig into this because one of the concerns that have been coming that kind of come up is a little bit like, well, if I'm going to start doing this stuff for this unrepresented buyer, I'm not going to do it for free, right? I mean, I want to get paid. Like, how do I handle that situation? And I don't know. I mean, I have my feelings on it a little bit different than maybe other people do, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, as a broker or licensee, you decide, you have every right to be paid for your services and decide what you'll provide, services. I mean, if an unrepresented buyer comes to your open house and wants to put an offer on your client's property, I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, are you not going to take the offer? Are you going to say, oh no, I'm going to charge you to write up an offer I mean, I don't
Well,
know.
it's one of those conversations that you want to have had, you should have had in advance. So,
I mean, yeah, it's
no,
true. I guess as a seller, I would think, well, that's what I'm hiring you to do. What do you mean? Somebody's going to give you an offer and I would pay extra I mean, I hired you to sell my property, right? So, but, you know,
and there are different ways to do it too. Like if someone wants to have a different fee structure, I mean, people have given
true.
discounts before if they have both sides. Some people charge more if they have both sides. It really just depends on your discussion with the seller. Or, there's some brokerages that say, I will never have both sides of a transaction. I think it exposes me to a lot of liability.
Right.
I don't think that I can properly, like, for example, let's say even if I represent the seller exclusively, so designated client representative for the seller, John's my customer. Well, if John's a first-time home buyer, like he doesn't know what he doesn't know, right? So am I really being fair? I'm being fair to the seller, but what about John? Like, I
What
can't
about
answer
John?
questions. Yeah, what about poor John? I can use another name if you don't want me to use your name anymore, but
That's okay. It's all good.
kind of what's his protection? It's not my job to protect him. I protect the seller. But what am I telling him? Does he understand that, does he clearly understand that my loyalties are entirely to the seller and not to him? Or am I just kind of shoving a piece of paper under his nose saying, I represent the seller, but I'm not really explaining any of it to him? Does it make sense to have someone else within your brokerage that you can do kind of these cross referrals to? So each side gets an advocate for the transaction. Some people may not, some people who are savvier might say, yeah, I don't really need, advice. Like I'm a flipper. I've done a lot of these before. I'm fine with that. But anyway, okay. So we've got, wow, we're almost at
I
2:30.
know with these long-winded answers, right? We thought we were going to get out early,
You're
and
not looking at me, are you, for that? With
yes, I'm
that
totally
comment?
looking at you.
Anyway, okay.
Should we build that into the listing agreement? If in the additional services fee provision, add that if the listing agent brings buyer to the table, then the seller will compensate the list agent for bringing buyer. I guess to your point, you can.
Yeah, whatever arrangements, that was that section 7 that John showed us before in the listing contract.
I mean, I
Whatever
guess.
arrangements, you just
I mean,
have
I
to
guess
make the case to your
you
client.
can do whatever you want, right? I mean, I guess the question becomes you really have to define what it means to bring buyer, right? Now, I'm wearing my seller's hat again. I'm just trying to think from the perspective of a seller because I'm hiring you as a broker to sell my home. And now you're going to tell me, well, if I'm going to get you some buyers, it might cost you extra. Well, wait a minute. That's what I'm paying you to do is get me buyers. I don't care where they come from. So I guess what you would have to outline is what do you mean? Like what is it? You're charging a fee for your services. And so what are the additional services you're providing to that seller on top of what they are already paying you for that would warrant the additional fee? Right. So somehow you have to do something that's not contemplated in what you're already getting paid for. And so I think you need to articulate that because, again, wearing sort of my seller's hat, I'd feel like, well, what do it's like when I bought my house, when you're having a house built and it's like, well, it's going to cost you extra if you want a doorknob to open the door. It's like, what? What do you mean? I'm paying you to build a house. I can't get in unless I pay you a little bit more. So I don't know. I mean, that's, I guess, my only 2 cents related to that.
It's really, it's all about the oh, I hate buzzwords, but
I
but there is
know.
one.
It's a,
Transparency.
right.
It's kind of, not just kind of mumbling stuff and not that I'm saying any of you have ever done this, but it's not just kind of mumbling stuff and shoving it over at a customer or client. It's explaining. So why is it? Well, does it make the transaction go more smoothly? Um, what's the level of work that you'd be doing that's different if you have both sides? Do you have to, are you going to spend like twice as much time explaining to the buyer why you can't give them any advice on anything? Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot to that.
Well, some could argue on the buy side. I mean, we only have a few minutes, so I don't want to go down this rabbit
Yes.
hole. But why is the buyer agent charging a percentage instead of a flat fee, right? Like, but why does it cost you as a buyer representative more money, or why do you get paid more if the house I'm buying is more, right? Like, in other words, if the house, is 500,000 or 1 million, your percentage is the same, but your fee goes way up. So why does it cost me more based on how expensive the home is from the buy side? Right. And I guess you could ask the same question from the list side, but you could argue that a more expensive home, there's, staging or more, there's more expenses. There's obviously a lot of other things that go into the costs involved in real estate that if the transaction doesn't go through, obviously you don't get paid at all on all those things. But, again, sort of wearing the buyer's, hat. And so these are opportunities, I guess, where some brokerages may come up with varying ways of getting varying models and how they get paid and move away from sort of the traditional models.
And I should
You're
told you
sharing your screen. Look at you, Monica.
I
Wow, you
know
go.
you can teach an old dog new tricks. Woo.
Wow.
Okay, this looks terrible
It looks
because
awful.
I didn't pull it from transaction desk, but someone had asked a couple of times in the Q&A, can you show me what kind of form I need to have that I need to have a buyer sign before we show the property. So this is an awful look. I just didn't have time to log into transaction desk and show it there, but this is one of the options that you have to have the buyer sign. If you're working with the buyer, representing the buyer, you would use this one or the showing and compensation agreement. One thing is you just want to make sure, I've been getting, and I think our tech department and membership departments have been getting questions from people lately who call up and they say, where's the buyer contract? And I pull it right up and tell them where to find it. And they say, I'm not seeing that on my screen. Why? Because they're a primary member of a realtor association in another state. They might be an MLS participant or subscriber in Rhode Island, but they're not a member of the Rhode Island Association of Realtors. So nearly all of the forms, except for the listing agreements, are Rhode Island Association of Realtor forms. So that's like the purchase and sales agreements, buyer contracts, addenda, et cetera. So just, double check your membership status, or people here can certainly help you do that if you're not sure why you're not seeing the forms or what to use. So final
Well,
thought.
Monica, we've got 2 minutes
I
to
know.
spare. Woo! Final thoughts. Another great session, I think. Hopefully people got something out of it. I feel like, again, as we've been dealing with this for a few weeks, we're getting more nuanced questions that are really helping us focus our discussions. And so we definitely appreciate your time. Yes, we have the question, does RIAR have a buyer facilitator agreement? Yes. Those are the two agreements, the showing and compensation agreement. Is that what we're calling them?
Yes.
Yes, there are two. There's an exclusive and a non-exclusive agreement. The showing and compensation agreement. So you'll find that under S when you look through the folder of forms.
Yeah, or you can just contact me afterwards if you're not sure where that is. But well, frankly,
Nope, found it. Found it,
you
they
could.
said. Good.
Oh, excellent. Good.
All right, let's get out of
Well,
here.
thank you for joining us again. And we hope, honestly, our goal is for the next one if we're going to do one more of these. And I would love to get it down to 10 people, because that means everyone knows what you're doing and you feel comfortable. And, but we're here to help you out. And thank you all
Yeah.
very much. Oh, and this is being recorded, so it'll be posted on rirealtors.org, rirealtors.org, on the settlement page in the next day or two.
Great. All right. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest
Thanks
of your
for
day.
joining us, everybody, and good luck out there.
Take care.
Okay, bye.